sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, so you guys sent us a ton on this plane and helicopter thing by Reagan National, and wow, this is a lot to unpack. Let's just dive right in.
It really is.
So to get everyone on the same page, January 29th, this Wednesday, right in D.C., the Potomac, practically right next to Reagan National.
Right by the airport.
Yeah, and we're talking American Airlines plane flight 5342 coming in from Wichita, Kansas, hits a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter.
Okay.
So we've got these eyewitness stories, official statements, all this stuff about how dangerous the Potomac is in January, you know, freezing cold.
It's all connected.
Exactly. This isn't just about the crash itself. There are 60 passengers on that plane, plus 4 crew and 3 soldiers in the helicopter.
Yeah, so many people waiting to hear what happened.
For sure. And the big question, of course, is how did this even happen? The FAA's first report says mid-air collision while Flight 5342 was landing, but the details are still a mess.
That's where the NTSB comes in, the National Transportation Safety Board. They're the ones who really dig deep.
So they'll figure out what went wrong.
They'll look at everything, the black box, all those recordings from air traffic control, radar data, the wreckage, anything that can help explain it all.
Got it. But we do have one pretty intense story from this guy, Ari Schulman. He was driving along the George Washington Parkway and saw the plane.
Oh, right. I read that one.
Yeah, and at first it seemed like everything was fine, but then all of a sudden it makes this super sharp turn to the right.
Wait, that sharp turn, that's really important. Could the pilot have been reacting to something like trying to avoid the helicopter?
Maybe. It's just, Schulman even said he saw a stream of sparks under the plane right before it vanished. That just gives me chills.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Makes you wonder, could that have been some kind of engine problem?
Right.
The NTSB will figure that out for sure. They'll be all over those engines looking for any sign of a malfunction damage, anything that could have played a role. They'll also look at what the eyewitness said and compare that to the radar to reconstruct the flight path.
See if the pilot did something unusual. And then there's the fact that this happened in the Potomac in January in D.C. Yeah. Not exactly beach weather.
No kidding. The National Weather Service actually put out a warning that day about how dangerous the Potomac was. The water was only around 35 degrees. That's cold enough to cause cold shock.
Cold shock.
You know how when you jump into really cold water, you gasped without meaning to?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
That's it. And sometimes people even inhale water because of it. And then there's the rapid breathing, heart rate goes through the roof, panic, disorientation. Imagine trying to get out of a sinking plane while dealing with all that.
That's awful. And then there's hypothermia on top of it all.
Right, hypothermia. Your body temp plummets in water that cold. You lose feeling in your hands and feet in just a few minutes. Makes it almost impossible to swim or grab onto anything to stay afloat. And after 15 or 30 minutes, you could pass out.
So they had to work fast to rescue anyone.
Oh, yeah, like incredibly fast. We're talking maybe 30 to 90 minutes tops to get someone out of that water alive.
So that water makes this whole thing even worse.
Definitely one of the worst parts of this whole situation. It's a race against the clock in those conditions.
And it sounds like a ton of people jumped in to help.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was all hands on deck. D.C. police, the fire department, Maryland State Police, even the Coast Guard, everyone working together.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, they had diverse helicopters, boats, you name it all, searching that freezing water.
It must have been pure chaos out there.
Imagine it, a weekday afternoon, a plane crashes one of the busiest airports in the country, right there in our nation's capital. Emergency vehicles everywhere, news helicopters swarming above the Coast Guard, trying to coordinate it all. It's intense.
And through all of that, you have families and friends just waiting desperately for any news about their loved ones.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is. And you see that human side come out in the way people have reacted.
Sure.
Like President Trump tweeted, "May God bless their souls."
Right, and D.C. Mayor Bowser said she's praying for everyone involved.
Governor Kelly in Kansas even said she's in contact with everyone, and some senators from Kansas are praying too.
It's amazing how even when we don't have all the facts yet, people immediately want to reach out and help.
It shows you that this isn't just some news story. It's a tragedy that affects so many people in different ways.
Exactly, and not just those on the plane and helicopter either. Think about everyone whose flight got diverted to Dulles, or all the commuters whose plans got messed up. This thing had ripple effects all over the place.
Speaking of Dulles, I read that they sent those warming buses to the scene.
Yeah, to help all the passengers who were diverted.
And they even added more trains to get people where they needed to go.
Right, all that stuff matters a lot. You have hundreds of people suddenly stranded, many far from home and totally in shock. So giving them transportation and the basic necessities is huge.
Good to know there are systems in place for that, even during something like this.
Yeah, it shows how prepared and coordinated different agencies are.
So we've covered the crash itself, how dangerous the Potomac is, and the massive effort to rescue people. But while we wait for more information, I think we need to remember how many questions are still unanswered. Like the biggest one for me is, how could something like this even happen? I mean, this is one of the busiest airports in the U.S.
Yeah, you would think there would be safeguards in place.
Right.
Well, the thing is, the airspace around any airport, but especially one like Reagan National, it's incredibly complicated. You have planes landing and taking off all the time, helicopters doing their thing, which have different rules, and even flocks of birds can be a risk.
I get that, but aren't pilots trained to handle that kind of stuff?
Of course, commercial pilots and military pilots, they go through intense training for all sorts of emergencies, including avoiding collisions. They know how to communicate with air traffic control, how to maneuver out of the way, how to deal with equipment failures. But even with the best training, things can still go wrong.
So could this be pilot error? Or maybe they didn't communicate properly with air traffic control?
It's definitely a possibility, and that's exactly what the NTSB will be focusing on. They're going to be going over that cockpit voice recorder with a fine-tooth comb, the one that records the conversations between the pilots, and they'll be listening to the air traffic control recordings too, just to piece together what happened in those final moments before the crash.
That makes sense. And another question that's been on everyone's mind is, are there any survivors?
We all hope so, but if we're being realistic, given the conditions, the impact, the time that's passed, the chances are unfortunately pretty slim.
It's tough to hear, but you're right that water was just too cold for anyone to survive for long. You mentioned the NTSB is going to be looking at the wreckage. What will they be trying to figure out from that?
They'll be looking at how the debris is spread out to get an idea of the angle of the impact, how fast the aircraft were going, and what happened when. They'll also be looking for any signs that something mechanical went wrong that might have caused the accident.
It's hard not to think about that miracle on the Hudson back in 2009 when Captain Sullenberger landed that plane on the river and everyone lived. But the Hudson's a lot wider and the water was warmer then.
Exactly. The Potomac, especially right there by Reagan National, is much narrower and more confined. Plus, like we talked about, the freezing water makes it so much more dangerous. It's just a terrible situation.
So looking ahead, could this lead to new regulations or changes to safety procedures?
It's certainly possible. Every time there's an accident like this, it's a chance to learn and make things safer. The NTSB investigation will probably come up with some recommendations, things like changes to pilot training or air traffic control procedures, maybe even aircraft design, all to try to prevent something like this from happening again.
It makes you realize that even with all the technology and all the expertise out there, we can always do more to keep people safe. And for those of you listening, we'll keep you updated as we learn more about this crash. But in the meantime, here's something to think about. Given how difficult it is to rescue people in a situation like this, what kind of advancements in emergency response technology do you think would be most helpful? It's a tough question, but it's one worth considering.
Absolutely. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. So until next time, stay informed and stay curious.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till